Your soulmate's family is talking about you. Here's why. My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this fictional story begins on an ordinary evening that no one expected to become so meaningful. A family had gathered around the dinner table to share a meal, tell stories, and enjoy one another's company after a long week. Laughter filled the room, memories were exchanged, and the conversation moved naturally from one topic to another. Then, almost unexpectedly, someone mentioned a person who was not there. The room became noticeably quieter, not because of anger or conflict, but because the name brought thoughtful reflection to every heart. Stay until the very end, because what unfolds next is not a prediction about your life or your future. It is a fictional story about character, personal growth, and the lasting impression that genuine kindness can leave on others. For many months, the person at the center of this conversation had quietly become known through simple acts of compassion rather than dramatic achievements. They were remembered for treating people with respect, speaking with humility, and offering encouragement whenever someone needed hope. They rarely sought recognition. They simply believed that kindness should be given freely, whether anyone noticed or not. Over time, those ordinary actions began creating an extraordinary reputation. People remembered how they listened carefully before speaking, remained calm during difficult situations, and showed patience even when life became challenging. Without realizing it, their character had become the reason others continued talking about them long after each encounter had ended. As dinner continued, one family member smiled and asked an interesting question. What is it about this person that everyone remembers? The room grew thoughtful. Different relatives began sharing their own observations. One admired the way they treated every individual with equal respect regardless of background or status. Another appreciated how they never seemed interested in gossip or unnecessary conflict. Someone else spoke about witnessing quiet generosity that had helped another family during a difficult season. Each story revealed another piece of the same picture. They realized that genuine character often speaks far louder than appearances, popularity, or temporary success. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. As the conversation continued, one older family member gently spoke words that captured everyone's attention. They said, "People may forget impressive achievements, but they rarely forget someone who consistently makes others feel valued, respected, and understood." Those simple words settled over the table like peaceful sunlight. Every person reflected on relationships within their own lives. They realized that the greatest legacy anyone leaves behind is not wealth or recognition but the way they choose to treat other people every single day. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not revealing someone's future. It was gently reminding every heart that love is demonstrated through humility, compassion, forgiveness, and truth. Meanwhile, the person being discussed knew nothing about this family conversation. They spent the evening quietly helping a neighbor, encouraging a friend through a difficult season, and taking time to appreciate life's simple blessings. They never imagined that while they were living according to their values, other people were speaking respectfully about the quiet influence they had become. They believed they were simply doing ordinary things. Yet those ordinary acts of goodness had become extraordinary in the eyes of others. As the evening drew toward its close, another family member admitted something heartfelt. They explained that the stories being shared had changed the way they thought about relationships. Instead of asking whether someone was impressive, they now wanted to know whether that person consistently displayed honesty, patience, kindness, gratitude, and integrity. They realized those qualities create relationships capable of lasting through every season of life. Everyone around the table quietly agreed. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Sometimes people speak about someone not because of dramatic events or extraordinary accomplishments, but because consistent goodness quietly earns lasting respect. In this story, what they experienced as God's guidance encouraged them to look beyond appearances and recognize the lasting beauty of sincere character. Every act of compassion, every truthful conversation, every patient response, and every forgiving heart becomes part of a legacy that continues touching lives long after the moment has passed. As another peaceful sunrise prepared to welcome a brand new day, every member of the family carried something valuable from that conversation. They left the dinner table determined to become more thoughtful with their own words, more generous with their kindness, and more intentional about expressing appreciation before opportunities slipped away. The discussion had begun with curiosity but ended with inspiration. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal what happens when the person who had unknowingly become the center of that family conversation is finally invited to meet them, leading to an unforgettable evening filled with honest conversations, unexpected encouragement, and hearts forever changed by kindness. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the invitation that had quietly arrived was about to become the beginning of something no one had expected. Listen carefully, because there are moments in life when people form opinions long before they ever meet someone face to face. Yet sometimes those opinions are not built upon rumors or appearances. They are built upon the consistent reputation of kindness, humility, and integrity that quietly grows through everyday actions. The family had spoken about this person many times, but now they would finally have the opportunity to know them personally. Stay until the very end, because what happens next is not a prediction about your life. It is a fictional story about how genuine character can bring people together. The day of the gathering finally arrived. The home was filled with warmth as relatives prepared food, decorated the dining table, and welcomed guests through the front door. Laughter echoed throughout the house while children played happily in the garden. Everything felt peaceful, yet several family members quietly wondered whether the person they had heard so much about would truly be the same as everyone had described. They were not expecting perfection. They simply hoped the kindness they had heard about was genuine. When the guest finally arrived, there were no dramatic entrances or extraordinary moments. They greeted everyone with a warm smile, thanked the hosts for the invitation, and treated each person with the same respect, from the oldest grandparent to the youngest child. They listened attentively during conversations, offered help in the kitchen without being asked, and showed sincere interest in hearing everyone else's stories. Nothing about their behavior seemed forced. Every action reflected quiet humility rather than a desire to impress. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not a sign about the future. It was the gentle reminder that authentic goodness is revealed most clearly through simple, everyday choices. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. During dinner, one of the older relatives began asking thoughtful questions about life, family, values, and the lessons learned through difficult seasons. Instead of giving impressive answers, the guest spoke honestly. They admitted they had made mistakes, learned through disappointment, and discovered that real strength comes from accepting responsibility, showing compassion, and continuing to grow every day. The room became very quiet. Several family members exchanged smiles because they realized they were listening to someone who valued humility more than appearances. What touched everyone most was not confidence alone, but the willingness to speak with honesty and gratitude. As the evening continued, the younger children naturally gathered around the guest, laughing together and sharing simple conversations. The grandparents watched with gentle smiles as they noticed how naturally kindness flowed in every interaction. No one had to encourage respect because it appeared effortlessly. The family quietly realized that the stories they had shared around the dinner table weeks earlier had not exaggerated anything. If anything, they had only described a small part of the person's true character. Genuine kindness had become visible not through words but through consistent actions. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its greatest lessons. In this story, what they experienced as God's guidance reminded everyone that lasting relationships are never built upon popularity, appearance, or temporary success. They are built upon patience, honesty, respect, forgiveness, generosity, and the quiet habit of treating every person with dignity. Those qualities cannot be manufactured for one special evening. They are formed over many years through everyday choices that shape the heart. As the celebration slowly came to an end, one respected elder quietly said, "Today we finally understand why your name has been spoken with such appreciation." The room filled with warm smiles, not because anyone had been seeking approval, but because sincere character had been recognized without needing to ask for recognition. The guest simply thanked everyone for their kindness and expressed gratitude for being welcomed so warmly. Walking home beneath the evening sky, they had no idea how deeply they had touched every heart in that house. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how one heartfelt conversation after this family gathering begins opening doors to friendships, understanding, and a future filled with trust, where every heart discovers that genuine love always begins with genuine character. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the invitation that once seemed like a simple family gathering slowly became an evening that every person would remember for years to come. Listen carefully, because people often wonder what creates a lasting first impression. It is rarely impressive words or extraordinary achievements. More often, it is quiet kindness, genuine humility, and the ability to make others feel respected. The family had heard countless encouraging stories about this person, yet they were about to discover that genuine character speaks even louder in person than it ever could through someone else's words. As the afternoon sunlight gently faded, the home filled with cheerful conversations and the comforting aroma of homemade food. Relatives greeted one another warmly while children laughed together in the garden. Grandparents watched the joyful scene with grateful hearts, appreciating another opportunity to gather everyone under one roof. The person who had been invited arrived with a warm smile, greeting each family member with sincere respect. They remembered names, listened carefully when others spoke, and thanked everyone for making them feel welcome. No one felt overlooked. Every conversation reflected kindness instead of self-importance, and every interaction carried a quiet sense of humility that immediately put everyone at ease. As dinner began, the conversations naturally turned toward life experiences, dreams, and lessons learned through difficult seasons. Rather than speaking only about personal accomplishments, the guests chose to celebrate the success of others. They spoke gratefully about mentors who had offered wisdom, friends who had shown loyalty during difficult times, and family members who had taught them the importance of compassion. Their words reflected gratitude instead of pride. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not revealing hidden knowledge about the future. It was the gentle reminder that a humble heart leaves a deeper impression than impressive achievements ever could. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story unfolds here. During the meal, one of the younger children accidentally spilled a drink across the table. For a brief moment, the room became completely quiet as everyone rushed to help. Before anyone else could react, the guest simply smiled, helped clean the table, reassured the embarrassed child that accidents happen to everyone, and gently turned the moment into laughter instead of discomfort. The child smiled again within seconds, and the tension disappeared completely. The grandparents quietly exchanged knowing glances. They realized that true character is often revealed not during carefully planned conversations but through unexpected moments when patience, gentleness, and understanding become visible without effort. Later that evening, several family members gathered outside beneath the evening sky while others remained inside sharing stories over warm tea. One respected elder quietly spoke to the rest of the family. "Now I understand why we kept talking about this person," they said softly. "Kindness like this cannot be pretended. It comes from years of choosing humility, forgiveness, and respect." Everyone nodded in agreement. They realized the stories they had shared during previous family. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its greatest lessons. In this story, what they experienced as God's guidance reminded everyone that lasting influence is built through ordinary acts of kindness repeated faithfully over time. Gentle words, patient responses, grateful hearts, and sincere compassion often change lives far more deeply than dramatic moments ever could. Character is never built in one evening. It is revealed through countless everyday choices that slowly shape both the heart and the lives of everyone nearby. As the stars slowly filled the night sky, the family gathered together one final time before saying goodbye. There was laughter, gratitude, warm embraces, and promises to meet again soon. Yet after the front door quietly closed, the conversations continued. Parents smiled at one another. Grandparents spoke hopefully about the future. Brothers and sisters reflected on the example they had witnessed. No one discussed wealth, appearance, or success. They spoke only about kindness, integrity, humility, and the peace that one sincere heart had brought into their home. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how one unexpected message from a member of the family begins opening the door to a friendship built upon trust, gratitude, and mutual respect. Proving that the strongest connections are never rushed, but are patiently built through truth, compassion, and genuine character. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the evening after that memorable family gathering became the beginning of a connection built on trust rather than first impressions. Listen carefully, because there are times when people spend weeks wondering about someone, only to discover that reality is even more beautiful than the stories they had heard. The family had spoken with admiration about this person's kindness, humility, and gentle spirit. Now that they had finally spent time together, those conversations continued, but for an entirely different reason. They were no longer discussing what they had heard. They were reflecting on what they had personally experienced. The following morning, the house was unusually peaceful. The celebration had ended, yet the memories remained fresh in everyone's hearts. While helping clear the dining table, one family member quietly smiled and said, "It wasn't the conversation that impressed me the most. It was the way they treated every single person exactly the same." Others immediately agreed. They remembered how the guest greeted every relative warmly, patiently listened to long stories without rushing anyone, and naturally offered help without waiting to be asked. No gesture seemed rehearsed or performed for attention. Every act of kindness appeared to flow naturally from a heart that had practiced compassion for many years. Later that afternoon, several relatives gathered again for tea, and the conversation unexpectedly returned to the same person. One grandparent reflected thoughtfully, saying, "Many people know how to make a good first impression. Far fewer know how to make people feel genuinely valued." Those words settled gently over the room. Everyone remembered moments from the previous evening that supported those observations. Some recalled thoughtful conversations. Others remembered quiet encouragement offered to someone feeling discouraged. Even the youngest children spoke about how comfortable they had felt. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not revealing a future relationship. It was reminding every heart that genuine love always begins with sincere respect for others. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story unfolds here. While these conversations were taking place, the person who had unknowingly become the center of everyone's admiration continued living an ordinary day. They visited an elderly neighbor to help with simple household tasks, encouraged a friend facing personal difficulties, and spent quiet moments expressing gratitude for life's everyday blessings. They had no idea that another family was speaking so warmly about them. They were not trying to earn approval or recognition. They simply believed that kindness should remain consistent whether anyone noticed it or not. Ironically, it was precisely that quiet consistency that had touched so many hearts. As evening approached, one member of the family decided to send a thoughtful message expressing gratitude for the visit. The message did not contain dramatic words or unrealistic promises. It simply thanked the guest for bringing warmth, humility, and genuine kindness into their home. Reading those words brought a quiet smile. They responded with heartfelt appreciation, explaining that they had felt welcomed from the very first moment and were grateful for the opportunity to spend time with such thoughtful people. A simple exchange of gratitude became the beginning of a friendship built on mutual respect. Over the following weeks, the families remained in contact. They exchanged encouraging messages, celebrated one another's milestones, and occasionally gathered again for meals and conversations. Every meeting strengthened the trust that had begun forming naturally. There was never any pressure to impress one another because everyone had already discovered something far more valuable than appearances. They had discovered character. The relationships continued growing through patience, honesty, laughter, and countless small acts of kindness that quietly deepened every connection. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its greatest truths. In this story, what they experienced as God's guidance reminded them that the strongest relationships rarely begin with dramatic moments. They begin with ordinary acts of compassion repeated consistently over time. Respect becomes trust. Trust becomes friendship. Friendship creates a foundation where understanding, encouragement, and genuine care can continue growing through every season of life. Those quiet foundations often become far stronger than anything built upon excitement alone. As another beautiful sunrise filled the horizon with gentle light, everyone reflected on how much had changed since that first conversation around the family dinner table. What had begun as simple curiosity had become sincere appreciation. What had started as stories shared between relatives had grown into meaningful friendships based upon authenticity and shared values. No one regretted opening their home or their hearts. Instead, they felt grateful that one ordinary invitation had introduced them to someone whose quiet example reminded them that goodness still exists in everyday life. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how one heartfelt family blessing during another gathering becomes a moment that leaves everyone smiling, grateful, and filled with hope for every new chapter still waiting to unfold. My beloved child, don't skip these final words, because every chapter of this fictional story has been leading to this peaceful ending. Listen carefully, because what began as a simple conversation around a family dinner table slowly became a story about character, gratitude, and the quiet influence one sincere heart can have on many lives. This is not a prediction about your life or your future. It is a fictional journey that reminds us how honesty, compassion, and humility can create lasting connections that endure far beyond a single meeting. Several months passed, and another family celebration brought everyone together once again. The home was filled with familiar laughter, the comforting aroma of homemade meals, and joyful conversations that echoed through every room. Children played happily in the garden while grandparents smiled as they watched the younger generations create new memories together. This time, no one felt like a stranger. Every person greeted one another with warmth, respect, and genuine affection. The relationships that had once begun with curiosity had quietly grown into friendships built upon trust and mutual appreciation. As everyone gathered around the dinner table, an elderly member of the family gently stood to share a few words before the meal began. The room became peacefully silent as every heart listened. With a warm smile they said, "There are people who enter a home and leave behind memories. Then there are people who leave behind something even more valuable. They remind us to become kinder, more patient, and more grateful for one another." Those simple words deeply touched everyone present. Looking around the table, they realized that the greatest impression anyone can leave is not through wealth, status, or remarkable achievements, but through the quiet consistency of genuine kindness. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because it carries the deepest lesson of this fictional story. After dinner, several family members gathered in the garden beneath the evening sky. They reflected on everything that had changed since the first conversation about the person who had unknowingly become the center of so many discussions. They realized that what had first captured their attention was never appearance or outward success. It was humility during difficult moments, patience when challenges arose, generosity without expecting recognition, and respect shown equally to every person. Those qualities had quietly inspired everyone around them to become more thoughtful in their own lives. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not a promise about future events. It was the gentle reminder that love grows strongest wherever kindness is practiced faithfully. The person whose character had inspired those conversations remained humble throughout it all. They never sought praise or attention. Instead, they continued serving others in ordinary ways, encouraging friends, helping neighbors, comforting those facing difficult seasons, and expressing gratitude for every blessing, both large and small. Without realizing it, their consistent example encouraged others to do the same. Acts of compassion multiplied throughout the family. More time was spent listening instead of arguing, forgiving instead of holding resentment, and encouraging instead of criticizing. The greatest change was not found in one person alone. It quietly spread from heart to heart. As the evening drew to a close, the family gathered together for one final photograph. Looking around at the smiling faces, everyone recognized something beautiful. The strongest relationships had not been built through dramatic moments or perfect circumstances. They had grown through countless ordinary choices to care, to listen, to forgive, and to remain present for one another. Every shared meal, every thoughtful conversation, and every act of kindness had become another thread weaving their lives together. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story leaves behind one final truth. A person's greatest influence is rarely measured by the words they speak alone. It is revealed through the way they consistently treat people when no recognition is expected. Humility, compassion, honesty, patience, forgiveness, and gratitude are quiet gifts that continue blessing others long after the moment has passed. Those qualities become a legacy that cannot be measured by time. As another magnificent sunrise welcomed a brand new day, the family looked toward the future with peaceful hearts. They knew life would continue bringing challenges, unexpected changes, and opportunities to grow. Yet they also knew they would face every season differently because they had learned an unforgettable lesson: genuine character has the power to unite hearts, strengthen families, and inspire hope where fear once lived. My beloved child, remember these closing words as this fictional journey comes to an end. Never underestimate the quiet influence of a kind heart. Continue choosing honesty when fear encourages silence, patience when life becomes difficult, forgiveness when resentment seems easier, and compassion even when no one is watching. Those ordinary choices become extraordinary blessings for everyone they touch. And so the story ended with grateful hearts gathered around a table where strangers had become trusted friends, conversations had become lasting memories, and respect had grown into genuine affection. No dramatic miracle was needed. The greatest miracle had already happened. Through simple acts of love, truth, and humility, ordinary people discovered the extraordinary power of treating one another with kindness. And as the first rays of morning light filled the horizon, they stepped into the future together, hopeful, united, and thankful for every chapter that had brought them to this beautiful new beginning.